2, 1. This is Living Raw Radio, and my name is Geeta Sidhu-Robb. And welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. We try each and every time to make it possible for you to meet people who I'm sure started off as ordinary people and at some stage took a left turn because life made them, because they chose it, and created these incredible, extraordinary lives. And I have the privilege today of introducing you to yet another one of those, a lady who is also my friend, Dr. Joanna Martin. Now, I have a really interesting story about Dr. Joanna Martin. I first met her because I bought one of her programs, and she taught me how to speak from a stage. And I was just like, I remember doing this way, way, way back when, and yet not ever thinking that I would know this person, because why would you think that? And then we found ourselves on a coaching mastermind program together. How long ago was that, Jo? 4 years?
Oh, it's got to be four or 5 years, I reckon. 4 or 5 years.
And I was like, oh my God, I know you. So welcome, Jo. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, you're very welcome. I'm really pleased to be here. It's great to have a chat.
It is. And Jo, I mean, I was going to read Jo's bio, but we don't have time. It's too long. I mean, Jo is a coach, a speaker, an entrepreneur. She's impacted over 120,000 people on 4 different continents. She was a medical doctor. And then she was in oncology, and the death of a favorite patient provided a wake-up call so that she should live her life on purpose. Within 6 months, she had changed career and went to the Actors Centre Australia, because of course you do.
That's what you do.
And she started to explore human psychology, behavior, and growth, and then came from there. And you can find out much, much more about Jo by going on her site, which we will tell you about a bit later on. But what I wanted to do now was I wanted Jo to come on because I wanted to talk about women leaders. Because one of the interesting things about COVID, one of the interesting things about the epidemic is that we have had such different kinds of leadership. We have had the populist leaders like Bolsonaro, we've had Trump, we've had Boris Johnson, and then we've had the women leaders. What has been really, literally, and what has been really interesting is that every single one of the women leaders has actually dealt with the COVID crisis better. Their countries have recovered faster, and they have had, to a woman, less deaths in every single country. It is mind-blowing, the difference between male and female leadership at this time. Now, we often say things like, if only there were more available women or more qualified women. And it turns out that's all just crap, because actually not all of these women leaders were natural choice selections to run these countries, but they were bloody amazing. Now, Jo knows so much about this, so I'm finally going to let her get a word in edgeways, and she's going to talk about women leadership, Jo. Jo, tell me, what do you think this came from?
Well, in terms of why the women have outperformed the men? Yeah, I think there's a lot that goes into it, but I think there's some key themes that we can pull out around what women leaders are naturally and forced to be great at. Because first of all, I think it's the mix of competency and compassion. In order for a woman to run a country or be CEO of a FTSE 500 organization, whatever it might be, but in order to achieve a level of leadership in the paradigm as it is at the moment, she's got to be exquisitely competent, every bit as competent as a man.
She's already a super achiever anyway.
She's already got to be fabulous, right? And then you add to that, that she will have her natural strengths of compassion. And I think it was a marriage of those two things, of compassionate but competent leadership, that you can see in Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. We saw it in Angela Merkel in Germany. We saw it in Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan. A mix of facts, clarity, decisiveness, but a compassion, like a sort of, I don't want to say mothering because it diminishes it, but it's not that compassionate, caring attitude, which I think has been critical. So I think that's kind of one of the key pieces. I also think that women haven't suffered from the sense of overconfidence in that they ought to know about how to deal with a global pandemic. And they seem to have been much more ready to defer to experts and take advice than perhaps some of their male counterparts have been. That ability to seek counsel, I think, is more prevalent there. And actually, the last time you and I came together, you were speaking on a panel for us, Geeta, about the glass cliff phenomenon. Yeah. And I think that's another one of these critical reasons that that women tend to find themselves in critical leadership positions when they are at what is called the glass cliff, where it is a crisis leadership moment. And I don't know, perhaps we tend to be a little bit more, well, you know, if this all goes terribly wrong, I'm going to get blamed for it. There's not much I can do. I may as well just do what's right and the best, because irrespective of how I perform, they're not going to, you know, cheer me on. You know, the paradigm we live in is not 100% supportive of women leaders. So I think these women, what I've seen is they tend to have done what feels right, with lesser kind of focus perhaps on their own personal kind of, you know, careers or feelings.
But I really agree with that, because for me, how that comes across is that it's a question of stakeholders. That, for example, I've been a raging capitalistic entrepreneur type, and life has slowly edged me with a boot up my butt into being a liberal conservatist who understands that there are different stakeholders, even for entrepreneurs and for the benefit of humanity, than shareholders. Mm-hmm. And I have to say, it sounds ridiculous, but it has been such a big change for me to do this. And I wonder if that women leaders just have different stakeholders, because male leaders have been talking about the economy, and their stakeholders are the economy, finance, banks, whereas women stakeholders are community, people, community, children, families. And I think if you just come from a completely different place because of that.
I think you're absolutely right. Traditionally, we women have had perhaps more of a generational kind of approach to things. Yeah. We are the ones who bear the children that go off to war, that are, you know, doing whatever, you know, on the front lines. And I think also, you know, as the natural carers in most countries around the world, whether it be the caring of children or elderly relatives or what have you, we have been looking at the how that's going to impact the communities that we care for. You know, I think naturally women are probably more risk averse than men. You know, I think they've even got a name for it, the white male kind of response in terms of risk assessment. If you're a wealthy white male, you don't walk down the street at risk. Your health isn't at risk. It
never occurs to you.
It just, and I just don't think it occurs that something like this could happen to you. And because of that, you're not filtering that way. Whereas women, well, first of all, we are a protected group in that we are more, we have been more at risk, I think, from COVID-19. Certainly the submission that we put together for the Women Equalities Committee would suggest that.
But, oh, really? I thought men were at higher risk.
Well, of the disease perhaps, but in terms of the impact of the global pandemic as a whole, the impact has been certainly disproportionately impacting women, especially women of color, women with disabilities, and so forth, in most kind of areas. So I think that's, I think generally we tend to think not just from our, as you say, our economic stakeholders, but our community stakeholders, our family stakeholders, and that's where a lot of those decisions are going to be made from. And I believe rightly so. You know, this is about humanity we're talking about. Economies, don't get me wrong, there's going to be a massive economic impact of this. But when your population is terrified, which 3 months ago we all were.
Some still are.
And some still are, exactly. I think it takes strong leadership to safely navigate a terrified population through something and out the other side. And trust is going to be critical there.
I agree, but I think that it's interesting because when you've looked at leadership before, part of it has been that women weren't trusted as leaders. You know, it literally was, because you were, you know, ridiculous things like you were going to get a period or you might go do whatever. And we've proven, and our generation has really seen this right from the first row, that in fact, women are having babies in power, they're doing everything, and they're managing despite all of this. And what this crisis has actually done more of is made people think that women as leaders are more trustworthy, not less, because they're more willing to look after you than they are to think, well, actually, you know, where's the money going to come from? And the money's not you. If you support an institution over the human, I think that is always showing up to be the wrong decision.
I certainly think that's how people are responding at the moment, you know, in their millions and billions around the world. And certainly you look at Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand. She has an 80% trust rating in her country at the moment as a result of the way that she has led the way through this. And I think with her, it started with how she responded to the attack on the mosque, you know, those years ago. She's just been that bastion of this kind of what I would call soft power leadership that we would love to see more of.
About that.
Well, look, there's been, you know, the term soft power has been around in politics for quite some time, but I like to think about it more as a personal place to stand as a woman, because one of the great things about having more women in leadership is it increases diversity. But if the women in leadership are showing up as masculine men, you know, out for their own and competing, putting their own priorities first, we don't get the impact of diversity. Pardon?
It's a man with a vagina.
Exactly. If we're just showing up as men with vaginas, it's not going to work. We have to bring those aspects of our whether we call them feminine selves or those aspects of our female selves, which are what is required for leadership in this day and age. And I think up until 5 years ago, there weren't very many great women leaders to look at. But what I'm excited about at the moment is that we are seeing a spate of extraordinary examples of what it can look like to be fierce, to be decisive, to be visionary, and to hold a powerful vision for your country or your organization, coupled with compassion and a sense of collaboration and community, and consultation. Do you know that I think we're starting to see this others-focused leadership getting more focus in the media, and as such, I think as women, you know, the next generation are starting to see it is possible. I mean, Jacinda had her first child in office, right? Absolutely. So it's possible. We can see these examples that it is possible for us to be the women we feel we want to be in our hearts and also make an impact. And for me, that's got to come from a place of soft power, not this masculine superwoman type power, but from a place of centered, compassionate, graceful, yet effective leadership.
But that means that also men can be those kinds of leaders.
Absolutely. In fact, I believe it's not necessarily just more women leaders that we need. It's more femininity in all our leaders.
Which brings us to the yin yang concept, that there should be
exactly
between their masculine and their feminine in order to have that.
We all need to have this. We refer to it, one of many, as harmony. You know, whether you are a man or whether you're a woman, no matter what body you're in, all of us need to be able to flow between yin and yang. And certainly the ancient Chinese philosophy would suggest that we want to be spending, you know, 50% of our time in each, like just moving between those. Even in her book Thrive, Arianna Huffington talks about the requirement for us to slow down, to stop, you know, to replenish, to have another metric other than money and power, you know. And I think this is a critical thing. Yet we women almost need to learn it first, because when we grow up as young girls who want to achieve and want to have impact, we tend to become even worse at ignoring our needs and ignoring the need for balance.
But the thing with that, Jo, is that I was talking to some coaching clients earlier today, and the thing with that is women are not taught to look after themselves. And we come up with lots of great phrases like self-care and all that crap. But actually, if you just taught women to value themselves, but I honestly think it's a very cynical exercise. I think that we don't teach women to value themselves, because if we did, we're afraid women wouldn't put up with the crap they put up with and do as much work as they do for nothing and spend as much time looking after everyone else as they do now. Don't you think that?
Whether it's been a very conscious choice or an unconscious choice, yes, I do agree. Yes. I think for millennia, the system has been set up to foster and prioritize the needs and the way of operating of the male, right? It's just the way that it is. And I believe that we've been sold, you know, certainly over the last century, you know, if we just have this cosmetic or this clothing line or this something, then we'll feel better about it.
And it's all external.
It's all external, as opposed to really looking inward. And what I see happen inside the women in our community, when they start to prioritize themselves, and I don't like the word self-care because it tends to smack of get a manicure and, you know.
Yeah, like face cream.
Exactly. It's not about fucking face cream, right?
Everything. Have a hot bath and you will find your power again. Like, shut up.
It's not that. It's about knowing, what do you need? Because we are taught as young girls growing up, either consciously or unconsciously, because some of us had great mums, great role models who didn't consciously.
Yeah, but I don't think they were taught it either.
But most of us, even if we had a great mum, we're still in this culture, right? This culture, this soup that where women are unconsciously expected to defer to the needs of men and prioritize the needs of men over our own, you know. You just see it. Just when you're dishing out the meal, you know, the broken bit of fish goes to mum, right? Not to dad. It's just right down at that kind of very nebulous level. And all of us, women and men alike, suffer from that same unconscious bias. So when women start to prioritize their own needs and start to look at, well, what is it I need? And then she starts to speak up and ask for partnership from her spouse, or ask her boss to not make such. We saw this with one woman I was coaching through the pandemic. She had a bloke on her team, and their boss was a man, and he said, oh, well, we'll call her Anne in this instance, and you can take that piece of work because James is at home with the kids at the moment. She was at home with her kids too, like everybody, but James wasn't able to do the juggle, and of course Anne was. And for heaven's sakes, you know, there was, I think, unconsciously being this burden, especially during the pandemic, has just shown up how we are holding most of it, do you know?
But the thing is that, the thing I find about that though, is that the women I've spoken to are accepting.
Yeah.
That they're doing it all. And they say, like, I have a friend who said, oh, well, I did all the cooking, blah, 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 in the pandemic. It was like everyone's home and I was doing it all. And I was like, so why don't you just ask your husband to help? Well, because I've always done it all. I'm like, well, I don't know what the hell you want me to say to that, because that just feels really, really, you know, you need to show up as well in order for this to work on both sides. So I do think that's important.
Yeah, because there's two pieces to this, right, Geeta? There's the systemic. We absolutely need to change the system that has it be assumed that it will be this way. But if in those very personal moments of a conversation with our spouse where we do or we don't ask for the help that we need,
yeah.
or in those personal moments in a conversation with our boss or with a client who's being way too demanding or whatever it might be, it's in those very personal moments of how we choose to show up and how we choose to set our boundaries, how we say no, or how we ask for the support that we need, or how we rally together. That's actually what's going to shape our ability to do that.
How do you help women to understand that they have the ability to do that?
Well, we have a bunch of different tools, because most of us just never got taught how to do it. So we don't have a language for it. We don't have a framework, right? We just don't. So one of the first things is we start with that language and that framework and talking about the fact, you know, that it's okay to do it. But one of the key distinctions we work a lot with is archetypes. And the reason is because it depersonalizes things. Many women can very easily see and safely see that they've been operating, for instance, in Superwoman. I'll do it all. I'll be the best at everything. I'll achieve everything, and I'll cook all of the meals, and I'll keep the house clean, and I'll make sure that someone has got Christmas organized, you know, whatever it might be. We can understand that, and we can laugh about it and see the impact that has, and then sometimes cry about it because we see that it's also causing us to burn out and get overwhelmed. And what we invite women to do is shift out of archetypes like Superwoman, martyr, bitch sometimes, because if we've been spending too long in that, we can, and victim, and to step into what we call our 5 women's power types, and to start to use the energy of archetypes like the Queen, you know, who is great at holding a vision. She is great at setting her boundaries, asking for what she needs, seeking counsel. You know, she's not the one rolling up her sleeves and doing it all. She's the one asking for the support that she requires from her, you know, from her realm, if you like, which might be her family, it might be her community, it might be her organization. You know, we ask women to work more consciously with the archetype of the mother, who is unconditionally loving and unconditionally caring, but not in every single relationship in their entire lives. We ask them to work with the archetype of the warrioress, who is fierce and committed and can fight for justice, but equally playful and has a great time and can unwind and let her hair down. So by consciously working with these 5 women's power types, the other 2 we work with are the lover, who looks after our needs, like the needs of our physical body, as well as, yes, sensuality and sexuality. But predominantly we talk about her in the context of she cherishes this vessel that we've been given, and also the sorceress, that one that is connected to our sense of faith, whatever that may be. So yeah, so we work with those 5 power types much more consciously, and it helps women to then get a language around how to operate differently than perhaps what they were brought up operating with.
So when you think like that, okay, so the first question is, how long does it take women to make that transition?
We see women, so we've just recently launched a new program where we had a lot of new women come into that. And we saw women having remarkable ahas within a week, just from some of the first principles stuff, standing up and having conversations, setting boundaries, asking for what they need, prioritizing their own needs. Simple things like have 3 square meals, drink enough water during the day. It's the basics, right?
Making time to eat.
Exactly. So we see shifts quickly with women. Then what we see is, for those who participate in longer programs, which we have a flagship leadership program which goes deep over 12 months, for instance, we see that the transformation in that shows up not just in terms of little wins along the way, but after 12 months, there's I don't know, I can't even call the word confidence. There's like a radiance that gets switched on inside that woman when she discovers who she is, values herself, as you said so beautifully, and knows where her edges are, and can sit within her own limits, ask for the support that she needs, set boundaries powerfully. And then her impact, this is the key thing. A lot of women have known how to slow down and check out. But what we see is women who are able to slow down, integrate, and then continue to have a big impact inside their communities, but without burning out. Because I think for so long it's been the choice that if I want to go for that promotion, or I want to transform my community and the environment, or I want to achieve an impact in politics, then burnout is par for the course. Overstretching is par for the course. But there's this possibility that it doesn't have to be that way.
Yeah. I was thinking that, who is that woman? Was it Sheryl Sandberg, who was like, women's power is all about your physical posture, lean in, and you're like, shut up.
Oh, do you know, yeah, I'd be very interested to meet Sheryl Sandberg, because I disagree with the concept of leaning in. I really disagree.
1,000,000%.
Yeah.
I looked at that thing. I never read the book, because I was just like, I and I was just like, I disagree with everything you're saying. I'm not going to go and read the book to prove that I think what you're saying is wrong, because you can't be a normal woman and not think we all lean the crap in every bloody day of every moment that we do. So, I didn't like that at all. Now, the interesting thing is, we're all talking, you and I both work massively, majorly, primarily with women. Got there in the end. And I think that people do not understand that the effect of lockdown primarily has, of course, been on the environment. But the majority of the effect of lockdown has been on women. It has a massive impact on women. And I would say that a lot of that impact has not been, the consequences of that impact has not been good. I think women have come out of lockdown gobsmacked, because they're shocked at how exhausted they are, that how much they are giving on a normal day, that how much they have had to show up again and again. It has taken our extremes of looking after children and elderly parents and put them all into one space. It has shown them how they don't have systems set up to look after themselves at all. And if jobs are going to be lost, the poorest paying jobs go first, and that's again always women. So it's been on and on and on. I think that people don't understand that as women come out of lockdown, they are going to actually start pushing back, because I think they're going to want to, because they've had such a bad effect. What have you guys seen about this in your community?
Yeah. Everything you've just spoken about, Geeta. We felt very recently the Women and Equalities Committee in Parliament started an inquiry into unequal impact of coronavirus on protected communities, of which women is one. And these inquiries tend to get submissions from big stakeholders, unions and representative bodies and big campaign groups and so on. But we felt it was really important to kind of have the voices of normal, everyday women heard inside of that. So we went out to our community and surveyed them on their experiences during lockdown. And I've got to say, it was one of the most heart-wrenching and still, even today, when I was reviewing our manifesto as part of coming and sharing with you today, I was in tears again with some of the responses that we had, because we have been dramatically impacted by this. Women of the, I think, 3.2 million high risk and frontline workers in the UK, 2.5 million of those are women, right? So we are at the front line.
As my friend Caroline Crowder-Perez points out daily, that they are wearing equipment that is not made for women. It's made for men. Because
we've got one of the emergency doctors, right? She heads the emergency department in her hospital. She is 150 centimeters tall, spent the whole time in protective equipment built for a 6'5" man, which means it's it's ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. Not enough PPE equipment and wrong PPE equipment. And that's the frontline workers, right? Then we've got women who at home, oftentimes, because of the way that things are set up, women tend to be self-employed or have the more flexible work because they've been looking after the kids anyway. So when things get challenging and we now have to do all of the caring and the childcare and the homeschooling, it's usually, and it was certainly the case in the women we surveyed, they were the ones where the brunt of the of that caring activity was falling, and the housekeeping kind of side of things. In addition to that, 90% of single parents are women. Like, I hardly survived lockdown, and I have the most supportive husband on the planet. We have great partnership.
Single parent.
Yeah, right? This is extraordinary. How women, and especially those who are at risk in terms of their economic seating, what they've been able to do in this period has been very, very minimal. Trying to work and homeschool and do everything all at the same time, whilst being the only person having all of their social networks taken away. It was absolutely extraordinary. And then we added to that, we heard from a lot of women who also were in the vulnerable health category themselves. It was terrifying, frankly. And I think the mental health burden of this has been largely overlooked, and we will only just start to see the impact of this because we've been in crisis mode, right? Everybody just does what they have to do to get through. But as we start coming out, this is when we'll start to see people, I think, fall apart a little bit. Do you know? I really do. As women get their support back, there's going to be, as you said earlier, that shell shock of, I've already seen a little spate of women in our community who are like, that's it, I'm done with my relationship, we're over. Relationships breaking up, not being willing to tolerate it anymore. Also women who are reaching out for a lot of mental health support. And often we're going to see a lot of women, and especially in minority groups, not necessarily able to afford the kind of mental health support that they're going to need to be able to get through what has been actually a traumatic event of a global scale.
What did you find for you was the biggest takeaway personally from COVID?
For me, what I've noted, the biggest thing for me, so I found myself at the beginning of the pandemic at the helm of a community of tens of thousands of women, grassroots women leaders, who I knew, because I knew these women, were going to be asked to dig deeper than they've ever had to dig. And at one level, I was feeling so resourced to be able to host that community and to be able to provide support into that community. And I'm really proud of how we did that. We provided a load of free training and a bunch of stuff. What I underestimated at a personal level, and I'm seeing this in all of our community, what I underestimated was, I think, the impact that it has had the constancy of the juggle, right? Where it was me and my partner, work and the kids, no additional support. We live on the other side of the world from my family, even if we could have seen them. I didn't give enough credence to the emotional impact of that daily juggle, working till midnight, up until, for 3 months. It was big. So I came out, a couple of weeks ago and I'm incredibly tired. So it was like a warrioress leadership came to the fore to help our community get through it. And I just got to that point where I went, okay, now I need to turn inwards, and have been busy tipping the balance back and replenishing deeply to do that. And I think a lot of us are going to need to do that.
Yeah, I found that the thing that it did for me was it changed my boundaries.
Yes.
I'm specifically, accurately, concisely clear about my boundaries. And I find it's impacted everything. I have a board meeting later today, and I'm not a process-driven person. Mm-hmm. You're very good at process, and I just look at process and I want to go bath in a corner, which is why my fabulous COO does all this stuff for me. I created an agenda. I was like, here's what we're going to do. Here's how we're going to follow it. I'm an entrepreneur. It's like, give me the strategic overview. I was like, hell no. Here's what we're going to do. It has made me more specific, more precise. It has made me respect myself and think, okay, what do I need? No matter what y'all need, what do I need? Because in fact, it's me that keeps all of this going, But I have seen that as a very big difference. And I think we're going to, yes, you're right. I think mental health and women's mental health. But, I think also we often need to be pushed to the end before we're willing to ask for what we want. So in those terms, I think it's going to be very bloody interesting.
I think so, because so many of us have been pushed right to the edges of our limits, and it's going to be in the recreation of ourselves as we move on from here that we can actually take what has been a dramatic event, both at a global and personal level.
Yeah.
There is nobody on the face of the planet that this has not impacted.
Exactly.
And I think at a personal level, we all have the choice to either go back to the old and let our old habits come back, or to let this great fracture moment count for something. And as we emerge together from this thing, to have it at a personal level, to create our lives in a way which is sustainable personally, as you've just beautifully illustrated, but also to not tolerate going back to systemic and global habits that were not sustainable.
I really hope we don't. Yeah, on that level. And again, I think it comes from we are the change, women are the change. And I think that although it has been so incredibly painful, I think that it is going to force women to be much more clear about what they want. Jo, thank you so much for your time. Now, how do people find you and find information about One of Many, and learn how to connect with you and how to reach out to you? How can they find that?
The best thing to do is come over to our website. It's oneofmany.co.uk, and there we've got loads of great free resources to get started with. One that might be particularly interesting for the women in your community is 7 rituals for calming the daily chaos. We all have the juggle to handle every day, and it's these 7 rituals that are the quick turnaround habits that our community, when they first get started, get them, getting back on an even keel and seeing the easy wins. So oneofmany.co.uk is the best place to come. Come over to the website, join the community.
So thank you, my love, so much for joining us. This was the fabulous, really, it's been a very long day, apparently. Fabulous. I know there's one stage where I was calling myself a hostess and having a fight on air about whether I was a host or a hostess, until I really wanted calling myself that, frankly. So, anything happens. So the wonderful...
We've all gone slightly mad over this period of time, have we not?
I don't have an excuse, actually. I think it was before lockdown, but fine. So Dr. Joanna Martin, thank you very, very much for joining us. And this is Living Raw Radio. And thank you so much again for joining us, and we will see you again shortly. And I hope you found it, as always, inspiring, thought-provoking, interesting. And there were very few swear words in this episode. I think we should, generally quite grateful for that entire process. It's like
actually a miracle, bearing in mind you and I think that's a miracle. We should be celebrating that.
I'm saying, right? Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.